Here at Commons, we really feel like we should be involved in the conversations going on outside of ourselves, to not insulate, to not silo ourselves, but to really participate in things going on outside, and to exercise voice. But before you can exercise voice, you have to listen. And so today we have Curtis Lefthand here, and he's going to present, and we have a chance to listen to his story. So let's do that well, and we'll welcome Curtis to the stage.
Hello. Hey. Okay, Sanadapi. Before we get into any conversation at all today, before I start teaching, I want to take a moment of silence to honor the Attawapiskat people who are in a crisis right now, a suicide crisis. So you can just take a minute and honor them, and just do whatever you want, pray, whatever you want to do. Okay. So what I'm going to do right now, as we get into the conversation, I'm going to smudge. And the idea with smudging is a ceremony to kind of cleanse, and to kind of cleanse the space and cleanse your mind, and kind of just get you into that free spirit of willing to listen. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Alex to come up here real quick. Also, Alex George is the other speaker that will be speaking after the break. She is Dene from Saskatchewan. And yeah, you guys can welcome her as well. And to our Amiskagowick Cree brothers and sisters going through crises. Abistaduki, thanks. Okay, now on to teaching. September 22nd, 1877. Does anyone know what that date means? Has anyone ever heard of it in like history class, like throughout Canada? No one's heard of it? Yes, you have? Okay. So September 22nd was the day that Treaty 7 was signed of 1877. Chief Crowfoot found it at that point in his time as chief with the turmoil that the Blackfoot people, my people, were going through, thought the only way to survive was to sign this treaty, an unlawful treaty, a treaty that was not held up by the federal government, by the provincial government. His words before signing was, "The police have protected us as the feathers of the bird protected from the frost of winter. I am satisfied, and I will sign the treaty." And as he made that declaration and signed that X on that treaty, multiple other tribal chiefs, which is the Yarhe Nakota, which I am also a part of, my father was a Yarhe Nakota, had come, and the Tsuut'ina chief had come, the Blood chief had come, and signed the same treaty following after him. And the treaty was signed at the Blackfoot Crossing, which is, if you ever heard of the Siksika Reservation, it's about 20 kilometers just southeast into the reserve. If you go to the Blackfoot Crossing Museum, you'll understand where that area is, because that is like the central piece and the central landmark of where that treaty was signed and where Chief Crowfoot fasted. So September 22nd, 1877. Now that was a huge change. It was one of the last treaties that was ever signed. And that being a part of our history in Canada and in Alberta, that brings me to say this, and for all you to know that as you are on this land, as Calgary is on Blackfoot traditional land, traditional territory, it is always good to honor where you are. So as an Itsitipian, as a Yarhe Nakota, I want to acknowledge our presence here on Treaty 7 in Blackfoot territory. And that's a huge thing to say, because you're recognizing that not only do you recognize the history behind that, no matter how awful it was, you recognize that you are a treaty member yourself because you are on this land. You don't have the litigations of status binding you to it, but you are still here. Thus, you are a treaty member. Thus, you're accountable member as someone who is settling here and living here. So going on even further, even before that year in 1877, as I have it up here, if you can see it just right, I don't know if you guys can see that right there, 1876, that was the year that the Indian Act was passed. This was also the first year that missing and murdered Indigenous women was created and became a platform for any type of judicial law to negate and to step away from finding any woman who is Indigenous in the community that has been separated and lost. They use this as a policy. They use this as multiple policies. And the thing is, this Indian Act, this policy was also amended multiple times. So now 1876, first year the Indian Act is passed. After that, Treaty 7 is signed, 1877. Now, you can see the dynamic there of how all of this, once the Indian Act is signed, and it's a cause of assimilating Indigenous people into Euro-Canadian society, you see how it shaped us as we were treaty people, as we were forced onto reservations, as we were in these bindings by law of how to live, separated and forced away from our traditions. So, in that, seeing the Indian Act as it's been amended multiple times, and you can see through, which if you follow social media, you can see on Facebook. Everywhere on Facebook, there is so many things with BuzzFeed posting up all these things about Indigenous laws, stuff like that in Canada. You can see all of that. But this right here, and I want to focus on that and teach you guys about that, just because this is where we're at, and we're at a turning point now. And it's not just because of the federal government that's in place, it is because of the Indigenous people, the next generation that me and Alex are a part of, that are stepping up and saying that this should no longer be a part of our judicial system in Canada. We need to be recognized as sovereign people. This took away our ability to see ourselves as sovereign people. And going further into that, the litigational strategy from this is far exceeding and very, very smart. One is you weren't able to translate anything that was like intellectually said to someone who could speak Blackfoot and didn't know how to translate into English. For someone who could speak Cree and could read anything on this list, on these laws, these policies that are set there, if they were to read it and they were to try to interpret it, they had no one there to interpret it. So the Indian Act is, and I hate to say it, and I don't want to sound like, and again, with what I say here today, I'm also not trying to make anyone officially feel bad, but to just understand. But this is a racist thing. This is a racist policy, and it exists today. So many times there's been multiple amendments, so many times there have been other lawyers, indigenous lawyers trying to come in and trying to change this whole systemic ideal of how to assimilate the first people who were here. Amendments to the Indian Act was, there were multiple, and I could go on and on and on, but I'm going to try and break this down as much as I can just so I don't take up too much of your guys' time, and just so because there are important facts that are there within the Indian Act and the amendments. So in 1876, quickly, a part of it was also a legal policy to create the Indian status, to identify the Indian, give allotment to land, give them this piece of land that this is what you get, and that is all you get. How you go about living here, how you go about farming here, which we had no idea really how to farm at that time. We didn't know how to do any of that. This is what you have. We'll give you minimal resources and show you a little bit of like how to dig, a little bit of how to place plants, but then the rest is up to you. And those allotment strategies too cause for enfranchisement. And enfranchisement is just a hole with the Indian Act, and you can see that everywhere. If you're to study Canadian history, you can see it everywhere. Now, I'm not saying anything that's taught in schools because it's not taught in schools yet. But if you're to study it, going out of your way and study what these policies are, you will see it there. In 1881, the federal government assigned Indian agents onto reservations. And this is a part of another amendment just to the Indian Act. This was something, they had this in place, and according to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, they said, okay, well we can use this now. We have so many policies in place there that give us the right to do this. Now we can take this and say, okay, here, we're gonna instill and in place Indian agents. And what Indian agents were pretty much the control system before we can even get any contact with the federal government if we were in turmoil. An Indian agent was placed there as, say, if I were to go to, say my family was starving, and we ran out of resources, and I had to get a hold of the federal government and ask them, hey, living in this time, I need more resources to gain food, to have my family live and feed, and to in some ways try to prosper. This Indian agent would be there, and the only time they would go and speak with federal officials and ask them, okay, this is what they need. But the multiple times that was 6 months, every 6th month out of a year. And that's you think about that for someone who can starve for 6 months trying to find food for themselves. Our own people, my people, the indigenous people across the lands. And the thing is, it wasn't even only for Nisitipi, it was for the Crees, it was for the Denes, it was for Treaty 8, it was for Treaty 6 and Treaty 7, it was for the settlements in BC, it was for the Iroquois Confederacy, it was everywhere. And I'm talking about the government system because it goes into a lot of it goes into how Treaty 7 was formed. Now, I'm going to jump ahead because the bylaws that were in place led up to one very signifying moment that changed history for a lot of Indigenous people too. How many here have heard of the name Duncan Campbell Scott? Do you know anything about who he was? He was a poet and a deputy superintendent for the Department of Indian Affairs. And his place as this poet and this superintendent was to break down the Indian, to take away who we are as children, place them in a place where they're completely excluded, become exclusive from their traditional ways, their tribal ways, and say that this is what you need to learn now. We're trying with the Indian Act, this is what we're trying to do to amend it, we're trying to help, but this is what you need to learn now. This is who you're going to become children growing up, this is the education you're going to get, and you're going to become a Euro-Canadian. From a Eurocentric ideal. This man. It was in 1920. He created what he mentioned in one of his speeches as he brought forward the policy and the backing of the federal government for the Indian problem, which resulted in residential schools, which killed over 6,000 Indigenous children throughout all of Canada. But that's just a cumulative and a speculation. And I would like to show a video right now, real quick, of what that looked like. And this is by Marie Sinclair, and he is a part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to help reconcile those survivors who have survived residential schools since 1920 and everyone after.
What took place in residential schools amounts to nothing short of cultural genocide.
Messages that they gave us, like we were heathens, we were pagans. My way of life was no good.
I'm a third generation. My mother is first. Coming from direct line from that. So I deal with that. I'm sure Alex deals with it too. Sorry. You see those things. You see this level of okay, you see these things, and you see, as you're a part of those people, as you're trying to remember those traditions and those stories, but you come from a background where there's almost like a complete cut off from that, where those stories are almost no longer there. where you're fighting to learn your language and remember what those words mean, where you're fighting to dance and to remember what that is like. That's a tough thing. Like I said, I deal with that every day. Trying to pull together. So, yes, in 1920. Here's the beauty, though. With that, this has happened. But like I said again, we're at a turning point now where this doesn't have to lead me or Alex or even her brother, us who deal with this on a daily basis, to live with that and to have that pride instilled back into us. And this was a part of amending this whole idea of the Indian problem was another amendment to the Indian Act. And you see those things there. And that happened in Treaty 7. That happened on this land that you're on. That happened 200 kilometers just outside of Calgary on the Siksika Reserve, or 300 kilometers down in the Blood Reserve. And you see those things, and these are a part of what shapes this land. It is heartbreaking. And the reason why I say we're at a turning point is because we honestly are. And we have that opportunity to help change that. Like I said, you're all treaty people. We have that opportunity to create relationship again. That's the generation that me and Alex are a part of, trying to help interpret that. What does that look like? Not only with indigenous people in our tribes and our band members and everything like that, and what the relationship with the church or the federal government, the provincial government. Like, we're at a turning point where this doesn't have to be looked like it. Yes, it is a part of our history. Yes, you should remember it. But it doesn't have to be where we go from here. And there's healing. And that's the best part. And who are great teachers of healing? I would like to say the Dene, the Nisitipi, the Yarhen Nakota. We know a lot about that. We have teachings about that. We have ceremonies for it. And we've had those for centuries. We've had those pre-contact that flowed and kept going post-contact. And I mean pre-contact, before our contact with settlers, or before our contact with Europeans. Those are something that have been carried for centuries, and they're still there. We still have them. So on top of this is that although the residential schools, and in the video you saw it said 6,000, that was just a statistic. That was just an accumulation of what had happened. It wasn't the full findings of like how many children had actually been lost by how many times, by what people are finding in these torn down residential schools today. And it's almost adding up even closer to, from what I've heard so far, this year is almost adding up to around 7,200 and something. And I'm probably wrong. I probably got some of the numbers a little off, but from what I know, it is in the 7,000s mark now. And the funny thing, not the funny thing, but the crazy thing about this is that all the survivors after, many have died because they were succumbed to drug addiction, alcohol, not remembering, not being able and being afraid that if you were to speak your natural tongue, your natural language, that if you're to do that, someone is going to strike you down. and say you were wrong. And again, this stuff is really heavy. And it should be heavy because it's a good way to teach. It's a good way to understand. It's a good way that we are peaceful people. To interpret that through these, we obviously had no choice, but we were still willing to understand and keep relationship. Even at that treaty that when it was signed in 1877, that treaty wasn't signed because one of the only reasons being that, well, we have no other option. A lot of the elders at that time, especially even for the Nisitipi, for my background from hearing of the stories from grandparents and even my mother, you hear about those stories and you hear about the elders and what they thought. They saw it as an actual treaty. They saw it as a level of relationship that we could honor. So, 1820, this is when the amendment happened to the Indian Act. And by that standard, multiple children were taken from their homes, were put into captivity, really, and if not abiding and learning and willing to educate themselves into the European society, would become malnourished from lack of food, and eventually die or survive, and eventually die even afterwards. There are survivors today, obviously, there are many survivors today that have held up who they are and have become stronger and have searched for that pride that they've always had. So that's one of a huge piece of one of the amendments to the Indian Act. This obviously all changed decades later. So after this, in 1851, which I'm not going to jump to the next slide because the next slide is actually going to be going into another huge piece of Treaty 7 again, but also of on the national stream, on a national level of the government, talking about that. But in 1957, after the Second World War and the federal government started realizing that, and this was, 1951, after the federal government had recognized that during the Second World War, that indigenous people had come, no matter whatever they were going through, no matter how they were treated unlawfully, they were still loyal. They still honored the treaties. And they went and they fought in a war just to hold up that honor. In 1957, after the federal government realized that they were willing to die for the Queen and for the monarchy, we needed to recognize them as indigenous people. Well, at that time, as Indians. We needed to give them their identity and help fight for that. But at the same time, remember the Indian Act. Remember although we need to fight for them, give them a little bit of their status, we still have the Indian Act, though. So in 1951, and it wasn't only just the federal government, it was also multiple chiefs from my community, chiefs from Yahe Nakota, like chiefs like Stony chiefs, Blackfoot chiefs. And also I should probably explain that too. Nisitipi means the only people, and that's what we call ourselves in Blackfoot. Blackfoot is a colonial term for us. If you were to ask me personally and ask me to identify who I am, I would say I am Nisitipi, and that means the only people. And Yarhe Nakota means the good people of the mountains. And if you were to ask me personally too, I would suggest that because Stony, again, another colonial term. And even going into that, coming from that idea of status, because that's a part of status. And in 1951, that was a part of it, was we're going to give you your identity back just a little bit because of what you did for us in the Second World War, for Canada, fighting for this country. And that was like a huge piece for us, because it was a huge piece for us to know that, okay, now we have that ability to be, we are who we are. The government recognizes it now. Hopefully everyone will recognize it. And that was a good thing for us, because it created the ability to be, if we were at that time, whether you're non-status or you were status, they still recognized your place in the territories. At that point, you could have Indian status, they still wouldn't recognize you until that point in 1951. And then after the Second World War, a few decades after, came the amendments. But if you can see, 1961, abandoning relationships, 1969, sorry. So I have a bit of them there, but in 1969, that's why I didn't want to jump ahead too quick, because in 1969, that's when the white paper was introduced. Have you guys heard of the white paper? Yeah. So the white paper is pretty much a declaration saying we want to, from 1951, now we want to abandon the relationship. We want to cause enfranchisement again. We want to take what we tried to review, and then we want to adjust it and say, okay, you're no longer, by the government, addressed as Aboriginal people of Canada. You're just Aboriginals in relationship with us. And by that, you could take away our resources. By that, you take away our reserves and everything with that. Now that we've come so far from in Treaty 7, from 1877 all the way until now you're going to take away those reserves. And that was a huge turn, because now, at this point, we relied so much on federal funding. We relied so much on the help of the government, because we were lacked resources, and the resources were taken away from us so much. Now we relied so much, but now they're willing to break that down and say that this is our ability to say, you just kind of fend for yourself. You can go off reserve, or you can not have a reserve, and you can go into a city, not have an education, try to find a job. Not going to happen. And the white paper was actually, if you guys know, Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father. Interesting turn. That was right at a turning point. Another Trudeau is in government. With the help of John Chrétien, Pierre Trudeau presented this and asked that it would be passed as law. Now, from that, it did not pass because it went against other laws within the Indian Act, other laws even within the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I should know that off the top of my head. It went against those laws, and it kind of brought in a global scale at that point. And so it was on a global scale that it's being recognized, and the white paper is trying to be passed, and it's like, no, this is actually illegal. It goes against the Indigenous people's human rights. So luckily and thankfully that it was not passed. And then jumping ahead from that, as that was not passed, and we were very thankful that this did not pass. If it had, we have been, honestly, there wouldn't be a lot of Nisitipi people around Calgary at all, or really. And the relationship, we'd be completely just a lost people. And now you go to 1970. And you go from the 1970s up until the early 80s, and you have Bill C-31. Do you guys know what Bill C-31 is? Yeah. So that is just, a way saying a call for gender discrimination. You could have an Indigenous woman marry a non-Indigenous man, and she will lose her status completely. But turn it the other way, you can have an Indigenous man marry a non-Indigenous woman, and he can keep status. But also the other part of that is that this is how strategic it was. It also went into how, and this is not even, you can Google this as much as you want, and you will never find it. But with that in 1970, with Bill C-31, it also went into how lineage was, how your children were to be at that point, even if you're already married before the bill was passed. If you're already married to a non-Indigenous person and your child and you had a child, you potentially, by the laws of the Indian Act and everything else, you could potentially keep your status, but your child will not have status, even if they were born. And before that had status, their status would be taken away from them. And there are multiple things there, and that's the crazy part about it, is you can see those things. You can see how that status law can determine what happens with your children. So for me, if I were to marry someone who is not Indigenous, my child can be status, my wife would not be, and everything would be fine, all that stuff. And for the mother, or a woman who is marrying a non-Indigenous man, and had a child who is pretty obvious, who had a child who is Métis, he or she would not have status. But then it even goes further. So, that child, if he, as a Métis, marries an Indigenous woman, or she is an Indigenous man, she wouldn't have status, but her children can. And see, this is how far it goes down. This is how far those litigation processes go. It separates so far down, becomes so confusing. And that is still, it's been amended, it's been reprocessed, it's been reviewed by provincial judicial law and by federal judicial law. But there are still things there that determine your status as an Indigenous person. And I want to leave it off there within the amendments and just where we are right now today, because from that goes into the residential schools and everything after. And Bill C-31 was also fought up until the early 1980s, until it was recognized and until it went under review. There have been multiple things where they said the bill has been cut down, but if you actually look through actual history, there are still status laws there, Indian status laws there, that are very similar to Bill C-31. It's just not called Bill C-31. So you see that, and then you go and jump ahead. I'm just going to change this real quick here. So this is obviously Alberta. The blue area is Treaty 7. Now the brown, or the grayish area right there is Treaty 6, and the green area is Treaty 8. Before I get into describing that real quick, we're going to jump ahead to 1996, where the last residential school was closed. And that's not far from where we are now. That's 20 years. Yeah. It hasn't been that long. And the residential schools closing came in after, and soon after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was brought about, and now there's that's why I'm saying we're at the turning point now where reconciliation can happen. And that is on Treaty 7. That is right out the door. That is with Indigenous people walking around in downtown. That is with us as we walk here on this land. That is with Alex and her family as they walk around. And that is the relationship we have with you. And Treaty 7, which is funny because all the tribes of Treaty 7, which I wish you could see the numbers, but through this numbered system, you can see that if you look just up ahead in the gray area, right around, I think that is Carstairs. No, that's just above Red Deer. So like Sunchild area. Have you ever heard of Sunchild? Have any of you guys heard of Sunchild? So Sunchild is a reserve just south of Red Deer, or just east of or west of Red Deer. And right in that area, there is the actual treaty members from Treaty 7 occupying that land in Sunchild, although they're in Treaty 6, which sometimes really makes no sense, just because of, again, the laws that are there. And I wanted to talk to you about that because Treaty 7 has everything to do with this on the national scale. And I wanted to teach you guys about those really quick, and yes, it was really brief. I want to teach you about those laws because that's why Treaty 7 exists. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm teaching. That's why I'm an Indigenous activist myself. That's why I stand in solidarity for my brothers and sisters across the nation who are going through turmoil. And it's good to recognize that. And honestly, it does and the people I've encountered and I've talked with that recognize, oh wow, we are actually on Treaty 7 land. What does that mean? It's like, well, you're on Blackfoot traditional territory, and within that you have the Yarrahare, the Stoney people, and you also have the Tsuut'ina people, and then you have the Bloods, and you have the Piegans, you have the Kainai. Yeah, you have all of that in there, and that is peaceful because it helps you realize, it's like, wow, I'm a part of that. Again, because you are a treaty person, because you're on that land. You live here in Calgary. You're on that land. And that is good, because that changes your perspective and helps you realize, well, how do I hold up that and honor that treaty? What does Treaty 7 mean? With everything I just told you, what does Treaty 7 mean? And that helps you create better conversation with others. When you interact with someone from Tsuut'ina, you interact with someone from Morley, which is the Yarrahare Nakota Reserve, and you interact with someone from Siksika, which is the Niitsitapi Blackfoot Reserve, or Eden Valley, or the Blood Tribe Kainai, or Piikani, which are as far south of Alberta. And everything like that. And also too, just I have a couple minutes here. Before I end, this blue area doesn't stop at the 49th parallel. Blackfoot traditional territory actually goes down further into Montana and everywhere on there. And it goes all the way up. But you see it. And I think from ending off, before we go to break, I think that is good for you to know. And again, I wasn't trying to make anyone feel like the most terrible person ever on this planet or anything like that. But I'm just trying to help you create dialogue for yourselves. To go out and speak with us and ask us more questions. As even if this is too vague, ask us more questions. Me and Alex are intellects enough to help interpret and teach. Her parents, my mother, her brother, more than willing to. But that is good because it creates that perspective, creates that dialogue where you can go out and create more dialogue with others, that you're on Treaty 7 land. And that is peaceful. And before closing off into break, by respect for my mother and the matriarchy, I want to honor my chief, Vincent Yellow woman, and out of respect for my father from the Yarhe Nakota, I want to honor my chief, Darcy Dixon. And the reason why I honor them is because that is a traditional piece of who we are. We honor those who are above us. We honor our elders. We honor our leaders. And I will explain that more after the break. But yes, that's a bit of the education of Treaty 7. And when I come back, I'll talk to you more about the traditional territory and what it means in our traditions and our ceremonies. Hello, hello. Okay, welcome back. So getting to the next segment of our teaching, I just want to introduce Alex George, who is of the Dene people. And she is a local artist in her community who is working at revitalizing art and traditionalism together, because they do coincide. And so I just like to welcome her and give her the floor.
Is the clicker this thing? Does this have like a pointer too? Oh yeah. That's what I was hoping. Okay. Hi, I'm Alex George. Haha, I always make people laugh. I don't know what's funny about that. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I'm currently living in Saskatoon. I am pursuing a 4-year bachelor degree in arts and science. I'm majoring in Native Studies and minoring in human geography. And it's funny, like a lot of people are asking me why. Like I decided to pursue Native Studies because I'm Native, and people are like, oh, it's just because like you're Native. But I think a lot of it has to do with like me really searching for my identity and really asking, what does it mean for me to be an Indigenous person? And a lot of that has to do with like what Curtis was talking about, has to do with the history, has to do with who we are now existing, like post this, and what are we moving into. And I'm also an artist just by, I don't know, I just love to make art. And I started a little kind of repurposing whatever company called Repurpose George, and I'll show an Instagram thing about it later. But then my idea with the Repurpose George is just that the idea of reusing everything, and that everything has a purpose, and not like building into this consumer ideal of lifestyle, that everything can be used and everything has a purpose. And so I'll talk a little bit about that after, but the project that I was currently working on in kind of my art had to do a lot about photography. And so I started kind of exploring some themes and some ideas having to do with Indigenous identity. And one of my cousins, who's also a really known local photographer in Saskatoon, I'll mention her too. Her idea, and kind of my idea too, is breaking stereotypes of Indigenous people. Like, if you were to Google, even if you were to just Google Indian or like Indian dress wear or something, you'd see all of this like Indigenous paraphernalia that has to do like, that doesn't really honor any of our culture. And a lot of the stereotypes you see of people, like you see it in media, you see it in TV shows, you see it on Netflix. You go on there and you see like the Notorious Six or whatever, that new TV show that Adam Sandler came out with, and all the Indigenous people did a walkout on him and all this stuff, and there's just like misrepresentation of Indigenous identity all the time, every single day. And so my idea kind of explores what is Indigenous identity, like how do I connect to that? And these are just some of the photos that I had did. That's kind of a self-portrait, I guess, but just in my home, places around me that I interact with, like a lot of the time, the way that I feel I connect to my Indigenous identity is through the outdoors and being connected to the land and family, hugely a part of family. And kind of like, you only ever see nature through a window, and how you strive to connect with the outside, but then it's like there's something always blocking you. Like, being an Indigenous person growing up, partially immersed in that lifestyle, but then like having to live in the city and reintroducing myself about what that kind of lifestyle, it's so different. Like I had no idea until I was like a teenager that I had lived in two different worlds, and people look at me and they don't think that like I'm connected, that like people look at me and visually, like sometimes people don't assume that I'm Indigenous, and that's also like has to do a lot with like my questions of identity and breaking stereotypes that like Indigenous people don't necessarily look Indigenous anymore, and it's so hard to walk up to like someone on the street and be like, oh, like you look like a Native person, but then maybe like they've been displaced like a couple generations ago with so many different things that had happened in the past, whether it was the 60s scoop, people being adopted like out of their homes, or like even being lost throughout the whole residential school kind of thing that had happened. And another picture, I was in a photography, black and white photography course at the university this semester. So this was a lot of the projects I had to do. A double exposure kind of like, this is our experience of nature, just kind of like coincides with like industrialism, and you don't have like this connection to the earth as we once had. Some pictures from around my neighborhood. This is in the doorway of my school and at the U of S in Saskatoon, and kind of like explains what I feel like I go through sometimes. Like every semester there's just this blur, and like I don't understand. Sometimes I have to remind myself like who I am as a person, who I am as an Indigenous person. And it's hard when like all you can see is like a blur of people, and you don't, it takes a lot out of me sometimes. So a little history about myself. Here's a map of Saskatchewan. Here's the little drive that it takes to get from Saskatoon to Patchnak. It's like 500 kilometers about, but it takes close to 6 hours to get there. And then here's a closer look. There's Saskatoon there. And you can see some other communities if you've like followed some of the things that are happening in Indigenous communities. There's like Laloche is up here, and some of the other Dene communities. And this area here belongs to Treaty 10 land. So if you didn't know that, that's what I'm a part of, Treaty 10. And closer look, here's Patchnak, where my whole family's from. And this is where Treaty 10 was signed. And there's a river system that both my parents had grown up on the land there. A little closer look. Patchnak. And the other photo project that I had to do was again, doing with indigeneity. And I went on a trip with my family up north over here. This is where my family's from, my mom. And then my dad kind of grew up trapping and hunting over in this area, I think, right? This way? Yeah, here. So it's like an extension of Dipper Lake over here, kind of another lake. I think I might have it written down wrong. It's way far over here. It's over actually supposed to be right here. But that's just another Google. So I'm from Dene Traditional Land, English River First Nations, and I wanted to document what it's like to travel up there and the process it takes from escaping, like Saskatoon, but to get up north. And this is the sign you first see when you get in here after you've driven down a gravel road for about an hour. And this is that again. And I've driven down this road hundreds of times. And picture my dad. Kind of emphasis on my dad. I feel like my parents are the knowledge keepers in our family. We feel very connected to the land, and my dad, he still gives back to the land. He thanks the Creator when we go hunting, when we trap, when we do everything. Like there's always this emphasis, like thanking the Creator, that everything that's given to us has been given directly from the Creator, and we need to like acknowledge that relationship. And my dad in his element here, like so smiley, happy. And This was in my grandma's house. I grew up with my grandma who beaded her whole life and speaks very poor English, so I have to like manage to try and speak to her in Dene every time I see her. And that's also kind of a part of my Indigenous identity that I feel like I've lost. I come from my parents who speak fluently in Dene, but then I've grown up, my parents had made a choice in not subjecting me to the hardships that they had experienced through, whether it's the residential schools or other things that they had experienced, whether it's just been like racism or anything like that. Like they didn't want my brother and I to experience things like that, so they chose to like not to help us in a way, but at the same time it's left me feeling like I've like needed to pull back, and I've needed to draw back, and I've needed to understand like what certain words mean, because the connection to language and identity is huge, and it has to do with understanding the land, and every word means a specific thing, and a lot of the time I struggle with understanding that. So my grandmother's beading. This is outside of her house, the wood. And this is on the way to the cabin after we leave my grandma's house. The forest fires that had happened all over northern Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, and like California, everywhere. That was crazy last year. And now what was once full of life, it's kind of charcoaled like this now. And our land is kind of just like burnt up, but there'll be lots of blueberries. So. And then lots of berry picking to do in the next few years. So a project I did was about my dad and some things that we do traditionally. This is a cabin built directly across from the cabin we stay at, and this is a cabin that my ancestors had built. My dad, my uncles and my grandpas and everyone. And this is something we do in the wintertime. We set nets underneath the ice, and usually it takes a process. My dad probably could do it faster if we weren't helping him, but he obviously just teaches us all the time. And so this is a closer look at that picture. Some trapper kind of sitting out like doing his thing in his element, and then him sitting at the hole, tying down the net. And then later, feasting. And then I like to call this picture about how all you need is a little black kettle, because my dad taught us growing up that we just need to rely on what's around us. We don't need technology. We don't need like all of these things. We don't need forks. We don't need anything like that. Like we just eat either like with our hands, or you eat with little makeshift like twigs or something like that. I remember like, was it Tommy that made chopsticks or something? Yeah. When we did this camping trip, this was back in February, I think. Yeah. And all you need is that. You don't need much else to connect with the land and to rely on. And obviously, like, it's hard. Like, I can't just expect people to say, like, oh, I can just go out into the bush. I can just, like, connect the way Alex said. Like, it relies on knowledge. It relies on that relationship to the land, relationship to your family, relationship to, like, the history that has with Indigenous identity. And the last picture of my dad kind of wrapping up something, not really sure. Some other pictures that I'd taken on that trip were here of us setting the net, and my dad kind of governing over us. There's my brother, and there's Keegan, my husband. And this was also a fun trip because Keegan had never come up north with us before, and it was his first time, and it was awesome. It was fun to share ourselves and share our culture and share what it means for us to connect with the land with him, because he's also grown up with a connection to the lake and a connection to the outdoors too, but then not living that kind of lifestyle all the time. But more pictures of our cabin. Also kind of cool because the repurposing project, like this is just a piece of log that my dad like drilled some antlers onto, and it just so happened that it looks like a gun rack, and it's like repurposed. It looks like it probably wouldn't have been anything, but it looks beautiful too, and it just sits there and it's natural. It'll return to the land one day. It's not gonna take like 100 years to biodegrade and all these things. So it's my brother eating his gambia chese, the boiling in the morning. That's what oatmeal's called in Dene. I like that word. My dad, he looks a little grumpy here, but and then Keegan. But I kind of love this picture because it's like, I don't know. You see, like, my husband's not an Indigenous person, but he's a part of our family. He's our ally. He continues to be a part of what we are, and he participates, which is like what you're doing here by listening to our stories, listening to the history, and you're opening yourself up to becoming not just a spectator or saying like, oh, I haven't understood this thing, so I'm just gonna continue living my life. Like it's a partnership. It's what we need to do to continue building a better future for our families and for my kids one day, who probably will struggle with the idea of being half Dene and maybe like won't want to participate in that kind of thing, and maybe will feel lost, or who knows. Like, I hope not. Like, my goal is for my kids to be strong, like Dene Indigenous people, and to have strong relationships with their grandparents and my dad again, because I love that picture. He's happy. He's not sad. He's happy. This is our beaver mitts. You can't survive in the wild if you don't have something handmade from people that you love. So we always wear our beaver mitts in the -30. Another picture of that. And here's just, I'll just flip through these quick. These are just some digital photography. This is the camera that I've been working with this last year. Just a fun little camera that I got, thrifted, secondhand. And this is what the cabin looks like in color. Keegan driving the snowmobile. My mom. My brother. My dad. My dog, because our dog comes everywhere with us. And this is a picture of our family at our little camp out. Obviously, we don't have just a black kettle because there's a chair there, but like the idea was that you make a little thing with spruce boughs. You don't need anything. You can just sit on the ground and interact with that. So some of the things that I do with Repurposed George are just to survive in the academic life. Like, I feel like it's been really hard for me to continue in my studies sometimes because I lose sight of what my goal is. And my long-term goals that I try not let stress me out is I would love to be an Indigenous lawyer one day, kind of like Curtis, who would also love to pursue that one day. And it's a little hard to think about sometimes, but right now the immediate goal is just connecting, finishing my degree. So things that I do to keep sane and go for walks by the river here and collect from the land, but not just like collecting, like giving back to it, whether it's giving something that's special to me or like I've personally haven't practiced like giving tobacco for the land, but it's something that I would love to do. And my thrifted basket, secondhand. Some of the things that I make, like a lot of the things I love to make are bouquets, these like dried up things. This is the bouquet that I made for my wedding last year. And it just looks like a beautiful ornamental wall piece now. And all of it's natural from the land. I didn't pay like tons of money for it. I just picked it off the ground. And this is like something that I love to share with people. Like, people think things cost a lot of money, and you can make something beautiful out of something that's just on the ground and arranged in a certain way. And these are some pictures that my cousin had taken for my wedding, and these are the bouquet, and this is the little the boutonniere that I made for my husband. And I've like extended for people to, because I'm like an artist, but also like it'd be nice to like to be known too, to share my knowledge that way with people. So some of the other things, just birch bark, whether it's collecting feathers and outside, and my dad cuts me wood slabs, and I do a lot of wood burning. So here's some wood burning that I had kind of picked up, art pieces that I sell, and some other ones that are work in progresses right now, a bear and a raven. And some other things are not like so traditional, but still kind of I make just because I love to do things like that. And so some of the things that I'm a part of, kind of connected to, this is my cousin's Instagram, Sweet Moon Photography, and a lot of her artwork has to do, she strictly just sticks to Indigenous people. It's not like a racist thing, it's just something that she like loves to do. She loves to like photograph Indigenous people doing what we do currently, not this like stigma of what Indigenous people look like. And this is a blog that she had started that I'm kind of going to be connected to. It's a group of Indigenous women contributing to society through photography and raising, talking about issues that they experience. And this is my email. So if you've ever have ideas or like want to, I keep meaning to really set up my Etsy account, but this is if you know somebody, and if you're taking notes, you can write this down or go onto your app right now and add it or something like that. Be a part of this. And so being an Indigenous person now is like, within the last year of my studies, I've really realized like it means connecting to my family. It means making the time to take the like 6-hour drive with the 2-hour boat ride or snowmobile ride to go connect, even though it's hard and we don't always have the time to do things like that. But that's what's important to me as like an Indigenous person who's going to continue wanting to understand what that means to me and my family, and even Curtis and people who are continuing to be a part of everything that's happening. So Mercy Chow means thank you. And Denny, thanks.
Okay, so I think I have about 15 minutes, so I gotta break this down as fast as I can. So I'm gonna go into the creation story. Now, this creation story for us is from the Blackfoot, the Mississippi people. And this means so much to me, especially being someone who was actually, who was once a Christian and actually attended this church. And a lot of this is reconciling who I am and my traditions back into what I remember, because I was almost lost. And that's a whole dynamic which I would ask for you to ask me questions, but I don't have time to get around that right now. But here's a creation story for the Blackfoots. So the old man was sitting on the highest mountain with all the beasts. The flood was caused by the above people, the spiritual beings. Because the baby, a fungus of the woman who married a star, was heedlessly torn in pieces by an Indian child. Old man sent the otter down to get some earth. For a long time he waited. Then the otter came up, dead. Old man examined its feet, but found nothing on them. And multiple other animals had dove into the water to find land from this flood and could not find anything until one, the muskrat dove. Went as far as she could go to find earth, to eventually build on top and build earth as it was. And she had died as much as she went down, but as she came to rise up, the old man found in her hand a bit of dirt, soil. And from that, he took the Turtle Island, and put that soil there. And as he dropped it there 3 times, the earth was created. Land was created. Turtle Island as a mother was where we would live. And that is a brief tale of our story of creation. And now from that creation story, I want to get into this, but to get into this, I must talk about the medicine wheel. Now, if you've ever seen a medicine wheel, that's a picture of Turtle Island. That's a picture of our symbol of what we know as, especially with this, before we knew any idea of settlers or any idea of Europeans. This is the land we knew, and that's why the picture is of the Americas and, yeah, the Americas. That is a medicine wheel. And a medicine wheel for the Blackfoot people means a lot. And I only have 15 minutes, so I have to break this down as much as I can, so I'm going to break it down as much as I can. The medicine wheel means a lot to us. Many have seen it as being either landmarks, so that the divine beings of our stories could recognize us and could see us and know that we are here. And if those exist, that we still exist, that we're still alive and that we're still breathing. And that if we need any harm, we go to there and we pray. Or we pray for it. We do the smudge. We do all we can to practice that and live in harmony in that way. So now you have the traditional medicine wheel for the Niitsitapi people. And this is the general medicine wheel that a lot of people see everywhere. If you go to any tribe, this is a lot of what people use. And there's a reason why it's a circle, and that will go into why this circle and this. North is white. So although this is, the placement, if we were to diagonally shift it, you would see. But north is, for the Blackfoots, is white, and it means respect. And the reason why it means respect is because is to understand yourself and to understand who you are and always to respect yourself and others. And then east is red, and that is living in peace with yourself, living in harmony. South is black, where balance is recognized by every single person, why this is a circle. And then west is yellow, and that is recognizing all your relations, indigenous or non-indigenous, doesn't matter. I'm gonna leave that picture up there, because this is my ancestor, and this man means so much to me and to my mother. And I'm gonna leave that picture up there because my mother, being sacred to me, this is our Blackfoot chief and ancestor. And I'll describe who he is and give you his name. So that circle, I'll actually go back quick. So the circle. Why the circle exists. Now this is just out of respect and honor of my father. I'm going to talk about how our matriarchal system and traditions go into how marriages happen. So, if I can find the marker quickly here. So this is a basic setup of a Nakota tribe. And it will say this is Morley. The Rocky Mountains you have there. And this is the tribe, and we were sedentary people. That's why there's a river right here. And sedentary means we're, different from being mobile. A lot of, did I click something? Did I? Whoops. I'm just going to leave that there. There we go. That's better. Being sedentary people, a lot of our hunting was not far from camp. And for fish and water was always just on the stream. And we always we always planted our teepees and traveled towards the stream and kept within the stream, beside the stream. Now this trail, for what it is, the reason why I have these figures here, these are Yarhe Nakota warriors. And for the Yarhe Nakota, what would happen is that because we are matriarchal and we are matrilineal, and because we are matrilocal, you would have, now I don't want to use green, but I'm going to use it real quick just so I can give you an idea. So we'll say, I want to put a dress on it, but we'll just go like that. There we go. Okay. We'll say this is, just a sister of the Yarhe Nakota. Now, every job they have is sacred, and there's a reason why they are warriors. They're meant to stand by this trail, which is the Black Hero trail, leading down to the river where she would walk down, collect water, and bring it back to the tribe so that they can drink. As she walks down, she has the choice to either decide who she wants to, after she collected the water, to walk back. And if she was interested in one of these warriors at her age, whether it be 14, 17 years old, to stop by a warrior she was attracted to and would like to marry at some point and give him water. Here's the crazy thing. Once that warrior is given water, because this is a sacred, this is why it goes in the cycle. Once that warrior is given water, he had multiple things he had to do to gain her hand in marriage. And because it was also matrilineal, these multiple things he would do would be to impress her mother and to impress her grandmother and then the father. So he could go doing anything, doing war parties, and war parties are actually just sneaking into another tribe, taking horses and bringing them back to your tribe. And that's what they would do. They would take horses, bring it back to impress the mother, grab plenty of meat, bring it back to impress the mother, and they could be doing this for 20 to 40 years until they actually get that woman's hand in marriage. Here's the other thing. Now, she may say yes, but if her mother says no, he has to wait longer and keep going through that cycle. Now, oh my gosh, I don't have a lot of time. So this is how the marriage system works for the Yarhan Nakota, for the Nestoni people. I wish we could go faster. Now say she says, her mother says yes. They would then take a teepee, and they would be placed next to with the mother. The teepee would be placed next to the mother's teepee. And then they would then start to conceive. They would practice to conceive. Once the wife has conceived, we'll just go like this. Once the wife has conceived, they would go through a system of ceremonies until she gives birth within that 9 months. So she will be right here. They'll say this is the mother right here. I know it's just a little line, but we'll say that's like the starting of life. And because we are matriarchal, and because we have, like as the Yarhair matriarchal as well, holding the wife above, that's why she went through ceremonies. Now, once the baby is born, put that little baby right there. Once that baby is born, ceremonies. Every single time. We'll say right here we'll say they're 10 years old. Ceremonies every single time, throughout every single thing that if they're male, if they shape a bow, they have multiple ceremonies as that bow is being shaped. If they're becoming a hunter, they have multiple ceremonies as they get them ready for that. If they're joining a society or a clan, they have multiple ceremonies to get into that. And I can't go into identifying what those ceremonies are real quick, but these ceremonies, well, I can say this, these ceremonies go into our traditional dances. Why powwows exist and everything too. So, you have these. As that baby goes, they get to the age of 10. Now they can play. Because they can play and interact and they're able to, hang out with the other kids, now there's a ceremony for that as well. Oh my gosh, I only have 3 minutes. Okay. And once this happens, this ceremony is saying, okay, now we're getting ready for you to go into the next stage. You're 20 years old. Through here, you interact with other children. You play with other children. You're 20 years old. Now ceremonies, going into the next life. You're becoming either a hunter or you join a society and you're going to become an elder. Ceremonies until that happens. That's why that exists, the circle. And it keeps going because even as you become a warrior, you become an elder, If you become an elder, there's a different piece to that. If you become an elder, a part of you at some age, you can either decide to either marry or not marry. But if you're a warrior, right here, at this point, we'll say you're 30, which is, you can say 30 to 40 to 50. Say you're 30, 40, or 50 years old and you're a warrior, and you've already have your society as a warrior, and you're a part of that society. Now, you're in that type of way of being, and like back to the design I had before, this is where, within ceremony as well, after the ceremonies, this is where she can go down, collect water, give the child who was right here, go in this circle, that water. And now he has to do his best to gain her hand in marriage. And that's the cycle. That's how things go. And within this, the traditional values are that there are dances that are there. There are feasts that are there. As they join societies, we have feasts. As they become the person who within their society, who they're supposed to be, they have feasts for every single thing, ceremonies for every single thing, dances, songs, powwow songs that exist there. But this is the cycle. As that is a circle and that keeps us balanced, this is the same cycle. Now I'm going to add something interesting because I have 1 minute. So he gets her hand in marriage, that 9 months, his baby goes through the same thing. And here's the other thing, when she's female, she'll go through the exact same thing. And at this point, she'll decide if she wants to marry and offer a warrior, at this point, offer a warrior if she's attracted to him, if she wants to marry him. If she feels he is fit enough, she wants to marry him. But she'll go through all this too, and be at the same time being taught all the traditional ways. Now, here's an interesting thing. At this age, 10 years old, and I'm just going to add this, just to kind of give you a feeling. I know I'm probably going to go a little bit above it, but I just feel like I need to add this right now. Where you're playing inside this circle with your people, residential schools, you're separated. Completely torn off. And the ability to get back into those traditional ceremonies could be impossible. That's why there's a circle. That's why you're within that realm. You're separated from that. Getting back almost seems impossible. Today, there's revitalizing into that, but that's something to keep in mind, that this circle works that way. So I'm going to leave it off there. As much as I could share the traditional values of us, that is who we are as the Nakota people. And the same system goes for Blackfoot, is like Nisitapi. Same thing goes for them, being matriarchal. And that's who we are. And that's a part of our, I don't know if it's the same for the Dene, but this is a part of our cycle of life. These are the traditions and the ceremonies, the feasts. Feasts are a part of it. So I'm going to end it off there. If you want to ask me questions more about this, go ahead. And we're going to go into a question and answer period. But thank you so much for your time. And I hope you do create dialogue and ask other people questions, other Indigenous people questions about the same things. Ask their perspective and their teachings. Because it's a wide variety across Canada. Thank you guys so much. So Alex was going to ask you to come up here. Come on. And I think we're going to move into,
Yeah, so we're just going to have a question time. So I've got a mic stand here, and I'm going to bring it up to the front. If you have a question for these folks, come up and ask.
Huh?
Took a while.
I don't know. It's okay.
Oh, countdown. Countdown.
No questions. Oh, you just walk up to the, right here. Yeah.
Just curious, as a starting point, like if you have any recommendations for somebody like myself who I feel like I know next to nothing, but I really want to learn. Would you start with reading Treaty 7, or would you start with more the conversational piece?
If you wanted to, yes, I suggest you do. Just because that's where you're, like, again, this is the land you're on, so it's good to have that knowledge.
Okay.
It's always good to know that. But at the same time, if you were to go to someone else and ask them, it's only thing I can suggest: talk to an elder of that tribe. Always talk to an elder of that tribe.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
Awesome.
I just want to know, I understand that, it's about your identity in Calgary, in Canada, and about reclaiming your identity. So if you were to actually reach out to the community, people, what would be your 3 main needs from people in relation with, you're reclaiming your identity in this society and in Canada?
You want me to answer first?
Can I go back?
Okay. I can answer at least 2 things. And the question was to reclaim our identity, what could change, and if you're like talking, what community are you talking about, the Christian community or? Oh, from people. Oh. Well, this is going to be a bold and very frustrating term that, and I mean, Alex, you might even disagree with me on this, but this is where I view this, and this is where I differ. The whole missionary system is a fractured system. It doesn't work. Christians on land trying to help them doesn't work. But there is still a relationship there, though. And there still can be a relationship there. Just the missionary system cannot work. And the reason why is because we're still in the process of reclaiming who we are. And once that happens, that relationship can continue and it can prosper and it can be something really great. Because I believe that. I believe that myself too. I just think stepping away from that, because that is a colonial ideal. And stepping away from that means so much more to us because it helps us give us that purpose. So that is like, I guess if we're asking something from the community, would be that. That's one thing I'll say. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, like the whole relational aspect, and even in the academic society, it takes a long time for there's not good relationships with Indigenous people and people who want to research us, and people who want to research and write books about us, and a lot of that there's lots of things that corrupt that whole thing too, because there's wrong interpretation, and I think a lot of it, like kind of what I was saying before about how becoming an ally means understanding, using knowledge from those Indigenous people, and relationships very heavy on that, like creating friendships. And I know that there's people that have come to research our people in Patchnak, and like they still have relationships to those people, like people who are from the academic society. It's not just about coming in, doing your little part, handing us like some things, and then it's an ongoing, continuing thing. Like it's not just one moment or one giving something. And I think creating positive relationships is, I think, huge too, and not just like contributing to that systemic racism in a way too.
I'm just curious what you think of the current reserve system. Like, is it a good system going forward into the future for future generations to be on a separate, like I really like that the Native communities have their own land that they don't develop like we do in our cities. But is it a good system for the children growing up to be separate from like Western society, I guess? And like how can we improve those relations, I guess?
first?
Go ahead. You go.
The reserve system is not good.
Wasn't created by indigenous
Wasn't created by
people.
us. It doesn't
Yeah.
need to exist. Accountability does need to be there between the federal government and us. But reserves, officially, there's no really huge need for them because that determines your sovereignty. That says you're no longer sovereign because you only own that patch when we're a part of all of this territory and she's a part of all the Dene territory. And yeah, go ahead.
No, just like for indigenous people, like we can't own the land. It was such an absurd idea for indigenous people to, like they were like, you can, this is your land. It's like, we don't own that. The creator owns it. We only like use what we have around us and what like the creator gives us. And like just kind of following in that idealistic, that idea that we can't make borders, we can't make profit off of like the land. And
To examine more on that too is that the reason why territories exist is because there's other tribes, and that's why there was those borders there, kind of. And it wasn't like officially ownership. And I'm not saying that as it was like, I guess it did kind of make it sound like I was saying ownership, but it's not. It's not that. It is. Yeah, we don't have official right to it. We have right to our sovereignty, but we don't have official right to say that we own everything. That's not the point. We just want our sovereignty as a nation to live here, as we did in the past, before the Indian Act.
was that answered kind of? What was the other part?
Yeah.
Hard to answer. Well, I'm just like curious how, going forward in the future, how can we improve a reserve system that's broken so that, like, the way I see it is, kids growing up on the reserve, they don't maybe get the same like education that they would in cities. It's just hard to relate to a native culture that doesn't coexist with us, you know?
Yeah.
It's hard. I know. Yeah.
So-
Yeah, it's hard because, like, there's an entire system that went into separating us. Like, we weren't a part of this new this new society that was Canada when people came here. We were put away. So it's like, it's been hard. Like, that happened like 100 years ago. It'll take another 100 years to like, it's little steps that'll continue to do that with, a lot of it has to do with the government and like what they've done. And that's hard because our idea of what government is doesn't mean anything to the Canadian government. And really, like, the Canadian government doesn't have any, like, I sincerely believe that the Canadian government has no authority over, they have no right to say that they have this all-empowering, like,
And as an
ability.
academic who's working towards studying Indigenous law at some point, I guess an official answer would be that recognize our laws, recognize what we knew, recognize our ways of education, our laws of education. That's how you change that system of the reservation. That's completely separate from the Indian Act, because the Indian Act doesn't identify any of that. So if you want to see the possibility of it, the funding, all that stuff, obviously we're in a different time. Federal funding should go directly to our education, but the education should be held by the elders, should be held by people who are of that same tribe and our intellects, being placed on reserve and giving them the funding to act there and to work there. That's the difference. And then recognizing our laws goes into our laws of the land, the rivers, the sacred processes of how Mother Earth works. That's how you change it. Now, is that far off? I don't know. With the way things are going, we'll see. Could be in the next 2 years, could be 50. I'm hopeful, obviously. I'm like a little
so
hopeful.
pessimistic.
It is, and like, let's just put it this way. It's really like we can say this stuff and we can talk about Indigenous laws and stuff like that, talking about like what those mean to us, because those shape how our education is how it is placed, how it happens. And then accountability coming from those other laws that keep us within funding range and the ability to be a part of that type of system, which we can't escape now. And now that we can't escape that, out there, for us, for academics who are in it, for my friends who are on the front lines as lawyers, it's grim. Like, it is so dark right now. I'm a little hopeful. But you can say that, like, when you look at it from outside of here and us teaching it as a young generation coming up, the people I talk with, my friends who are on the front lines right now, who are occupying INAC offices right now, it doesn't look very pretty. And it is very grim for us. But there's a reason why we're still fighting. And that's why I had a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
But yeah, system is gonna, it's no longer, the reconciliation is no longer a part of you and us. It's more so now us and the land, us and our laws. And that needs to be identified. That's how you change that, what you just asked. Reservation system should not exist. It should never have existed. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Awesome.
Thanks, guys. I think it's interesting you watch, and just like a bunch of good Western Canadians, all of a sudden the questions are, what's the problem? How do we fix it? And I think that's our natural tendency. But really, again, that's not what this is about. This is not here for us to try to figure out how we fix problems or identify problems. This is an opportunity for us to listen to stories. And that's what Weekend University is about, to bring people in, to hear their stories, and then to allow that to sink deeply into us as human beings, because that begins to shape how we respond, how we speak to each other, how we learn from each other. And so I want to say thank you to both of you guys for coming, presenting, sharing those stories. We have a small gift for you to say thank you for being here. But again, thank you so much for being here with us. Curtis, Alex, thank you so much. Thanks, guys. There are a few more. Go ahead, thank you. There are a few more treats and a little coffee in the lobby if you'd like some. I'm sure, I don't want to speak too much for these two, but I'm sure they're willing to stay and answer a few questions, at least for another 5 minutes if you do have anything. So come by, say hi, introduce yourself. Thanks for being here with us. We'll see you tomorrow for church. Thanks, everyone.